Shout out to Bring Our Q, Julius, you legend. We're going to do a joint interview, yeah? Yeah, we'll do a joint interview, Julius. Thanks for the support. You're a legend. From your girls, Raven and Ellie.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Former WBC super featherweight champion Terry Harper was quoted as saying, "After being world champion, that's the goal for me again. I've realized the importance of having world championship status. I just see it as another challenge." And even though the fight with Rankin hasn't formally been announced, most people feel that's who Terry's going to be fighting. That's who she's going to be taking on for the WBA junior middleweight title. Terry Harper making a considerable leap, taking a considerable leap, a leap of faith from lightweight up to junior middleweight.
What's that, 3 or 4 weight classes?
Terry Harper's last fight was at 135 pounds after having moved up from 130. She's now set to fight at junior middleweight, so that's basically 135, past 140, past 147, all the way up to 154 pounds, junior middleweight.
There might be a catch weight in play, maybe a rehydration clause.
Because Terry Harper's not a natural junior middleweight, you understand. The announcement of Jonas versus Bergult seems unofficial confirmation that Terry will be fighting Rankin.
Because initially the story was Natasha was supposed to be fighting Hannah, but Hannah decided to go in a different direction.
Terry Harper's direction. Word around the campfire seems to be that she was offered a lot more money to box Terry than what she stood to make, unifying with Natasha. This fight with Terry, it's a title defense, a voluntary title defense, and what could be a miscalculation for Team Harper, who quite possibly, they might be biting off more than they can chew here. They miscalculated with Alicia Baumgartner after a long layoff and a hand surgery. That backfired. Could this backfire?
Well, I don't know. That's why we watch.
I mean, that's what we tune in to find out. That's what draws us in. That element of danger, that element of intrigue, not knowing if this is going to go the other way for Terry or if Terry will become a 2-division champion. That's the appeal of the fight, the attractiveness.
So even if it works out for Terry at junior middleweight, I don't think she's going to stay there because she's not a natural junior middleweight.
There are some big, strong girls up there that could pose a grave threat to a naturally smaller fighter moving up in weight like a Terry Harper beyond this Rankin fight. And they will have Terry in their crosshairs, given that she's with a major promotional outfit and she may end up having an alphabet title. You're talking about a heavy-handed mid-range to inside puncher in Marianne Alborg. You're talking about the woman that beat Marianne Alborg, unbeaten Priscilla Perterle of La France. You're talking about Canada's own amateur standout, unbeaten Mary Spencer,
who has a lot of size on almost anybody and everybody at junior middleweight.
She's a tall drink of water, a tall drink of skilled boxing. That's what she is, and she punches hard with both hands.
But if the risks are this grave to Terry, campaigning as a junior middleweight, why is she going up there?
Well, it's the world title situation that forces Terry to move up. If she wants to fight for a world title, she's got to look north, because at lightweight, there's only one champion, and that's Katie Taylor. I don't think the Harper people really want that fight. Moreover, I don't think Terry is on Katie's radar. You look north of lightweight at 140 pounds, and very soon it's going to be announced that Chantel Cameron's
going to box Jessica McCaskill on the undercard of Bivol versus Ramirez.
It hasn't been announced yet, though it might be by the time that this video is uploaded. That's going to be in the fall over there in the Middle East.
And if Chantel Cameron's boxing Jessica McCaskill, that's one less champion for Terry Harper to fight.
One less champion at 140 pounds. Kaylee Reese is still missing in action, and she's in possession of the other 2 alphabet titles at that weight. Jessica McCaskill, she's the welterweight division's undisputed champion. She's supposed to be coming down for this fight with Chantel Cameron, and if she's fighting Chantel Cameron, she's not available to fight a Terry Harper.
Jessica's got all the belts at 147 pounds, and if she's moving down to 140 for a Cameron fight, she's not available for a Harper fight.
She hasn't vacated those titles that she holds at 147 pounds either. It's my understanding she's not about to. Not yet, anyways.
So you can more or less see how we got here.
There are not very many, if any, world title opportunities between 135 and 147 pounds. But at 154, if you're willing to move up there, if you're willing to go there's at least one.
Terry wants to box for an alphabet title.
Even if there are certain risks involved, when Terry moved up to lightweight, I half expected her to take on a lot of Katie Taylor's old opponents, former champions, fighters like that, fighters that have already shared the ring with Katie. She's decided to move up in weight and box for a title instead because as a reigning champion, you do get more money.
Your guaranteed minimum goes up.
We know that an alphabet title is no substitute for a big following. Big following always equals big marquee value, whereas a belt, it's not always the case, but in most instances, you are guaranteed a little bit more money as a reigning champion.
Yeah, your guaranteed minimum goes up.
And that's likely why Terry Harper is so hell-bent on getting her hands on an alphabet title, even if she's got to go all the way to junior middleweight to get it.
All the way up there.
It's a good fight, intriguing one, and I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that there are certain dangers associated with it. There are certain perils for Terry Harper taking on a seasoned fighter and a reigning champion who's naturally bigger in Rankin. Let's see if this fight don't get officially announced in the coming days. In men's heavyweight news, Daniel Dubois is hoping his next fight will come against Dillon Whyte. And by all accounts, that seems to be the direction that both combatants, both fighters, are going in. There have been widespread rumors and rumblings that will be Daniel Dubois' next fight. Daniel Dubois, who says, I'm very excited about it. I really want to fight him being Dillon Whyte. If that is the next one, then I'm all up for it. It's the next step in my career and the next step to big names and big fights, Dubois said to Unibet Lowdown. This is the fight that can take me to the next level. With Dillon Whyte or any of those names, I need to fight him and I need to beat him. These guys saying I'm a quitter, I want to get them in the ring and show them how much of a quitter I am. I want to make them quit. If they can make the fight happen, then make the fight happen. It's what I want now, just to shut them up and all the guys that have something to say. I'll deal with them.
I do vaguely recall Dillon Whyte taking shots at Daniel Dubois after that Joe Joyce fight.
A lot of people did. A lot of people accused young Daniel Dubois of quitting in that thing because he made the decision to stay down. He suffered a fractured orbital bone in that fight.
And not a lot of people extended their sympathies towards Daniel. There were people calling him a quitter.
And he still feels raw about it. Dillon Whyte's coming off that knockout loss to Tyson Fury, but a fight with Dillon...
That'd be the biggest name on Daniel Dubois' resume and the most proven fighter that he will have ever fought.
Dillon Whyte is a fighter that gets a lot of shtick for his form, or the lack thereof. He gets a lot of shtick for his punch resistance because he's been knocked out 3 times by 3 separate guys. He's a guy that gets a lot of flack, but he's also a more world-level guy, a more proven guy than any guy that Daniel has fought so far. Don't forget that Dillon Whyte has shared the ring with Robert Helenius. He's shared the ring with Derek Chisora 2 times, a former champion in Joseph Parker, and a former Olympian, then unbeaten, Oscar Rivas.
Gave Lucas Brown his first professional loss when he knocked him out.
Lucas Brown is currently coming off that sensational big upset win over the much younger and much bigger Junior Fa. Dillon Whyte is a fighter who's been around the block with a lot of fighters that have been around the block. This is a massive step up in competition for Daniel, who since facing Joe Joyce, he has gotten himself back in the winner's bracket. He's racked up 2 or 3 victories since then, but those were mostly pedestrian-level opponents. I mean, even Trevor Bryan, who he just fought, who he just stopped, who he just knocked out.
Trevor might have been unbeaten, but he wasn't proven.
Most proven guy that Trevor Bryan fought was an over-the-hill Bermain Stavern.
Dubois versus Whyte took me by surprise because I half expected Dillon to take his business elsewhere.
Leave Matchroom, go to Sky.
That's what I was expecting, to be honest.
Because quite a few Matchroom fighters have migrated over to Sky. Fighters and faces that we have become accustomed to seeing on Matchroom shows. Fighters like Savannah Marshall, April Hunter, Michael Hunter, Huey Fury, Chris Eubank Jr., Chris Billum Smith, Liam Smith.
Lawrence Okolie very soon.
He's been having it out with Eddie Hearn on social media, and the latest rumor that the rumor mill is spinning is that he has also parted ways with 258 management.
Looking to change his decorum.
And I thought Dillon might want to change his decorum as well, because it's not like Matchroom has that many fighters for Dillon to fight with at this point. I think he's done all he can there, and I figured he'd expand his horizons. What I didn't figure is that he'd have an extended stay at Queensberry Promotions. Having fought Tyson Fury as part of a Queensberry promotion, I didn't figure that the relationship there was good enough and strong enough that he might decide to fight one of their other fighters, Daniel Dubois being that fighter. We know that Frank Warren has expressed an interest in this fight in the past, as far back as 2020, when he proposed that Eddie Hearn match his Matchroom fighters against some of his Queensberry Promotions fighters. It seems that that could very well be underway, and I like the fight. I like the fight because it's not a foregone conclusion that either man wins. Now, Daniel Dubois, he's got less wear and tear than Dillon Whyte because he is a younger, less experienced fighter, though Dillon, in spite of being more experienced, he's coming off a knockout loss, the third knockout loss of his career. He was knocked out by Anthony Joshua, knocked out by Alexander Povetkin, and more recently, he was knocked out by Tyson Fury. Daniel is catching Dillon Whyte at a very opportune time. Though does Daniel have the selection of punches, the variety
To knock him out?
to catch Dillon Whyte the same way those fighters did? The common denominator in every single one of those fights, every single one of those knockout losses, is the uppercut. Dillon Whyte is a sucker for an uppercut.
The uppercut's not exactly Daniel Dubois' money punch, though he could always add it to his repertoire ahead of this fight.
Because by now, both he and Shane McGuigan must know that Dillon Whyte, in spite of being durable mid-range to inside and dangerous and powerful, he knocked out Derek Chisora off a short left hook, mid-range to inside.
Yeah, offensively, Dillon Whyte might be alright mid-range to inside, but he's vulnerable. He's a sucker for an uppercut.
Mid-range to inside. It's not often that a fighter is quite as vulnerable as Dillon Whyte is inside of their own sweet spot, as that is Dillon Whyte's sweet spot. Mid-range to inside, in the pocket, deep in the pocket. He might do his best work there, but he's also vulnerable there. And if Daniel plays his cards right, he might starch him the same way Anthony Joshua,
Alexander Povetkin, and Tyson Fury did.
Dillon might be more experienced than Daniel, but you have to wonder if his punch resistance isn't waning, having been stopped as many times as he's been stopped. Daniel Dubois himself,
He's got his vulnerabilities and drawbacks too. He doesn't keep his head off center. He doesn't move it.
Dillon Whyte employs the lead hand in a Dubois fight the same way he employed it in that Oscar Rivas fight, a fight where he spent most of the fight jabbing the guy's head off. If he employs that strategy, could he inflict the same damage to Daniel Dubois' eye that Joe Joyce inflicted on Daniel's eye?
I'm telling you, it's a good fight.
Though most of the name value in association with this match and what could make it box office, what could make it pay-per-view, most of that value is added to the card, added to the show by Dillon. He's been on pay-per-view before, more than once. Daniel hasn't.
Dillon Whyte might be coming off a loss, and Daniel Dubois might be in possession of a WBA Reggie belt, but Dillon Whyte's the A-side fighter.
He's the ticket seller out of the two, and he's the one that's been on pay-per-view on several occasions, not Daniel. So it's going to be interesting seeing what it takes to get Dillon in the ring with Daniel Dubois. What dollar amount makes the fight happen, makes the fight possible? It's a good fight if they can get it done. Finally, in men's lightweight news, bit of information that came as a surprise to no one. Late yesterday, it was announced that Devin Haney would be boxing George Kambosos Jr. for a second time. We already knew those guys were going to fight because the fight's been scheduled on BoxRec for weeks, and before Devin Haney even beat George Kambosos, it was widely reported that George has the option of an immediate rematch, and the rematch must take place in his native Australia.
It's been interesting seeing the usual suspects try to spin this to their narrative.
It's not hard to understand why some content creators might elect to upload clickbait behind sensationalized headlines based on stories that aren't even real, stories that aren't true. They get money out of it after all.
By the time people realize those guys are full of shit, they've made their money already.
It's why people choose to be lied to that really baffles me. When the information is readily available at the click of a button, you can Google search this stuff yourself, and you will have already seen that the fight between Devin Haney and George Kambosos Jr., the rematch, it's been scheduled on BoxRec for weeks, even before Vasyl Lomachenko arrived in Los Angeles very recently.
We already knew there was going to be a second fight. A week after he lost to Devin, he exercised his rematch clause.
He activated it. He being George Kambosos Jr., who we knew ahead of the fight had an immediate rematch clause, and the rematch had to take place in Australia. Vasyl Lomachenko can't swerve a Devin Haney fight because a Devin Haney fight wasn't on the table for him to begin with. And we've talked about that. As far as this second fight, As far as this rematch, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't expect much of a difference.
Maybe this fight will be somewhat more eventful than the last one.
I saw something about George Kambosos Jr. saying that if he loses to Devin for the second time, he will retire. He made very good money from that first fight, something to the tune of $10 million. And that $10 million in tandem with whatever he stands to make in this rematch.
You know, the splits for this thing might be predetermined.
The rematch clause incorporated into the initial contract. The splits for this fight, they might be predetermined as well. And George Kambosos Jr., win or lose, might be set to make a nice chunk of change.
Another one.
But I saw something about George saying that if he loses to Devin again, he's going to retire. George, he's only 29 years old. And you have to consider that even if he loses to Devin Haney for the second time, there's really no shame in that. Losing 2 fights to the same guy, one guy who's one of the best young boxers in the sport today, this division's undisputed champion. George is only 29 years old. And even if he loses to Devin again, what you have to consider is Devin's on borrowed time as a lightweight, as an undisputed champion. He's not going to stay there forever. He may very well be on the eve of leaving this division. And if he does, and the belts go vacant,
Well, think about it this way.
Devin beats George, decides he wants to move up in weight immediately after. Belts go vacant, and George may then be able to get himself back in the winner's bracket and get himself back in world title contention. That's if Devin decides after this fight, after this rematch, to move up in weight and vacate those titles. There's a separate scenario where Devin sticks around lightweight for at least one more fight and defends those belts against Vasyl Lomachenko. While Devin's doing that, George, he can take on a domestic level guy, get himself back in the winner's bracket, and start working towards getting back in world title contention, because any way you slice it,
The belts could change hands very soon. Perhaps not in this fight, but the next one.
perhaps. As far as the fight itself, because George is actually contemplating retirement after this fight, should he lose, he may fight harder in this fight than he did the first time out. He may be willing to take more chances, but a George Kambosos Jr. that's a little bit more gung-ho and a little bit more willing to take chances, that's just an easier target for Devin, because Devin's got a lot of advantages. He's the taller, longer fighter, the faster fighter, faster feet, faster hands.
George can't match his athleticism, and if he opens up more, he might get hit more.
He can't match Devin's athleticism or his accuracy. Devin's base style doesn't do George's base style any favors. And George, he's not going to suddenly become a completely different fighter overnight. George might opt to throw more punches in bunches, try for more shots, and get countered even more in the process.
And even if he were to manage to make Devin a little bit more uncomfortable, Devin's got feet. Devin's got movement.
Because Devin is the longer, rangier fighter, he can get in and out of striking distance easier than George can. He's faster than George.
And if all else fails and George pins him down, he can tie George up.
You know, a lot of people don't like that strategy. They don't like that tactic in a professional boxing match, but it is an option, and we see it all the time. If worse comes to worse, you tie that guy's arms up to smother his work and get yourself out of trouble.
It's an option.
The conservative prediction is Devin beats him again.
That's how I see it.